Now, as we know, the inside of a suit jacket is a little bit of a mess. And while I'm sentimentally attached by now to a lot of the elements on the inside, I don't really want them to be visible while I'm wearing the jacket. So we are going to line it naturally, and we're going to start today with the front panels. Now, if you've ever lined a garment before, the chances are you've done something in the vein of attaching all the lining pieces together to form one unit, attaching it to the garment around the edges, and then bagging it out through a small hole that you've left open for that purpose, which you then close with some hand stitching. But that's not enough hand stitching for me, my friends, and we're not going to do it like that, not in your life. So let's go cut out the pieces and we'll see what I mean. So this is my lining fabric. What do you think? So after lining my last jacket with cotton, I decided I wanted to try again with a dedicated lining fabric. Again, so this is a synthetic fabric. This is just sort of triacetate. It's very fine. It's slippery, but not too slippery. So I think it should be just about okay to sew with, but we'll see. I won't lie, when I first got it, I thought, what have I done? This was a terrible idea, but it's really grown on me. You know, I'm quite fond of this sort of tealy color, and I think ultimately, you know, to go with black, with a blank canvas. But let's get down to the cutting and I'll show you what it is we're gonna do. So what we need for this is the panels of the respective parts of the jacket that we're trying to line. Today, I'm just doing the front panel, so the panel that I've created by joining the side and the front panel so far. Basically, we're just tracing off from these main pattern pieces to create the lining pieces. Obviously, if you'd rather just create a dedicated lining pattern piece based on these measurements and then cut out with that, you can do. Anyway, I'll start with the side piece, keep it simple. What's gonna be important with the lining is that the lining be ever so slightly larger than the actual jacket itself, so that there is enough ease for the lining to move around, to accommodate the wearer's movements and to stop it from pulling or tugging or stretching in an uncomfortable way. But otherwise, we want it to correspond pretty much exactly to the actual panel that we've used for the garment itself. So it's kind of like what we did with the inlay. We're just going to mark a little bit of excess around these patterns, and that will then create this extra ease that we want, this extra roominess in the lining itself. Okay, so just lined it up with the grain line. So in this case, my hem isn't included in my pattern piece, so I need to add that as well. But otherwise, we're just adding literally 1/2 centimetre along the sides and 1.5 centimetres along the top of the sleeve. So my hem was 5 centimetres, my hem allowance. These fabrics can be super slippy, so do what you gotta do to get by. If in doubt, just freehand. Okay, so I'm just gonna mark the wrong side for sanity's sake, and then snippy snip. I think it's really important with fabrics like this to just be very slow and steady when you're cutting, because it's very easy for the underlayer, for instance, to just slip while the top layer remains stable. So for the front panels though, we're going to do something slightly funkier. You can see here there's this line drawn along the front of my front panel, and what that is a line that corresponds to where the inside edge of the facing is actually going to appear on my jacket, more or less. So obviously this bit is already covered by the facing, so we don't need any lining for that part. All we need is lining essentially from this line backwards. So what I'm going to do, kind of fold this around like this and do it like that. Okay, what measurements do we need here? So firstly, along this back bit, which is going to attach to the side panel, we just again want that same 1/2 centimetre. Again, here at the bottom where the hem is, we want my hem allowance, which is 5 centimetres. And then on this edge, the edge that is going to join the other edge of the spacing, we want an extra 2.5 centimetres or 1 inch. And then lastly, but not leastly, here along the shoulder, we want an extra 2 inches or 5 centimetres, and you will see why in a short while. And one thing I didn't mention is that we want also that 1.5 centimetres around the inside of the armhole there as well. And there we have it. Again, I'll just mark the wrong sides. I always love the way these fabrics sort of glide. It's very attractive. Ooh. Anyway, enough of that. Straightforward enough to start with. We're just going to sew these two pieces together. Ooh. So just with the 1 centimetre seam allowance. The seam allowance will be the same between the lining pieces that you've cut based on your actual jacket patterns and those patterns themselves. And obviously, as ever, press that seam open. Cool, all right, press that. I think you can tell I didn't adjust my thread tension exactly, but we live and learn. Okay, so what we're doing next is I'm gonna put a little pleat in this section here, just around the upper chest or just coming up to the shoulder. Remember when I was cutting this lining piece based on my front panel pattern, I added an extra 5 centimetres or 2 inches up here. Actually, it was only 4 centimetres because I put my pattern down, started tracing, started cutting, only to realise by the time I got up here, I hadn't left enough space for the full 5 centimetres, so aren't I an idiot? Boo-hoo. We'll get over it. So what we're going to do is at the mid-armhole level, so kind of just before it starts to curve round underneath here, just going to draw a line, and this line is going to be perpendicular to the edge across there. And the idea is this is going to fold over like that. And so of the full 5 centimeters that you've left up here, half of that is going to go into this pleat. So 2.5 centimeters or 1 inch. So assuming you're doing an inch, what you're going to do, so you've drawn your main line there, that's the fold line. And then you're going to measure down half of that distance again. So in my case, I'm just doing 1 centimeter, but if you were doing an inch, you'd do 1.25 centimeters. So marking a second line down from that first line, and then beyond that, yet another one. I've got my 2 centimeters here. If you've measured it properly, it'll be 2.5 centimeters. So this is the top edge that's going to come down. That's the point at which it's going to fold, and that's the line it's going to come down to, and it's going to go sort of like that. And the idea here is that, so we're going to have a inner pocket here, and I mean, you know, it's kind of up to you as to how many pockets you're going to do. I'm just going to have the one inner pocket here on the left inside. But the idea is that when you're using that pocket and you're sort of pulling down on the pocket, this little bit of ease here is just going to help give a little bit of relief to that, because if it was just flat basically against the front, there's going to be a lot of tension coming down vertically here while you're using the pocket. So that's just going to alleviate that. Okay, so just press that, and I'm going to baste it along the sort of upper edge. And again, so you're folding the pleat downwards on the right side of the fabric. And so in a short while, we're going to be sewing this edge to the edge of the facing, and that will catch that properly and fix the pleat in place. And then much later, kind of towards the end when we've done the sleeves and we're sewing the sleeve lining and this line together, it'll get caught on the other side as well. Back in the happy place, the land of baste. Okay, so it's now time to make the pocket that's going to go on the inside here. And I'm going to make a type of pocket called a Barcelona pocket. So you can just do like a piped pocket, kind of like the ones that we did for the hip pockets, just without the flap. Or you can do like a welt pocket, really any kind of pocket you would like, even with flaps, you do you. The Barcelona pocket I really like, both because it looks super fancy, but it's actually, I find, much easier to make than, say, a pipe pocket, a jetted pocket, something like that. So I'll get on with it. You can learn how to do it too. And I'm sure you'll agree with me that it is the pinnacle of elegance. So here's what I'm going to use to make this Barcelona pocket. Not much is needed really. So 2 sort of garment fabric strips like this. These are sort of 4 centimeters by 20 centimeters. And then 2 pocket bags, which, so originally I cut them sort of 18 centimeters by 18 centimeters, so they're squares. But then what I've done is not dissimilar to the breast welt pocket, is sort of trimmed 1.5 centimeters off the top there at an angle. So 1.5 centimeter wedge, so 1.5 centimeters up there and then straight along, and it's kind of coming down at an angle there. Okay, so the first thing I need to do is sew these 2 strips together along the long edge. But what's going to happen is for the middle 13 centimeters, and that's going to be the pocket opening, I am not actually going to properly sew, I'm just going to temporarily baste. So this is 20 centimeters long, so that means it's going to be 3.5 centimeters on either side. I'll just mark that. So what I'm going to do is sew these together. That bit, that first 3.5 centimeters is going to be a normal stitch, and I'm going to back stitch a terrible amount there, and then I'm going to change my stitch length to sort of, you know, half a centimeter or something, carry on along there, and when I get to here, I'm going to back stitch again, change back to the shorter proper stitch length, and finish that off. And you'll see why in a short while. I'm just going to use a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance here. Okay, so I've gotten to my 3.5 centimeters, so I'm just going to back stitch a little bit more, and then I've sewed back up to that transition point, and now I'm going to increase my stitch length to 0.5 centimeters, and I'm going to carry on until I get to that other marker there. Okay, so I'm going to change back down, sew a little bit, back stitch again, and then just finish off this stitch as normal for the last 3.5 centimeters. Snip the threads. And then obviously I'm going to press that seam open, as we do with all our seams, always and forevermore. Okay, so I've pressed that. We're going to set that aside for now. We're going to return to our actual lining panel. And what we're going to do is we're going to mark the placement lines for the pocket. I mean, ultimately, you could improvise this if you wanted. That's the whole point of making things yourself. You don't have to play by the rules. But I'm going to play sort of by the rules and show you what I'm going to do. So we've cut this sort of 1.5 centimeter slant into my pocket bags. And that's because the pocket itself is going to be at a sort of upward slant towards, you know, going towards the side panel there. So I need to mark the placement line, and that placement line at this sort of inner end is going to be around 6.5 centimeters from the bottom of the armhole. And I think the easiest way then to orient the actual slant of the pocket itself, if you've already cut these pocket bags, that's going to determine the slant that you want. So just line it up so that the slant is heading upwards towards the armhole, and then you want to make sure that this edge, these 2 edges here, are kind of parallel to each other, and that means that this bottom edge is also, in theory, going to be parallel with the hem, which it is. So that's my line. And this line is just going to be the same length as these, which is 18 centimeters. So first things first, I'll draw that on. And because we've got this sort of 13 centimeter basted opening, I just want to mark that on here as well. Sorry, when I say 18 centimeters being the length of this, I don't mean this, I mean the length of the pocket bags, or rather the width of the pocket bags. But so I still need to mark that 13 centimeter pocket opening in the middle here. So this time it's 2.5 centimeters either side, or an inch. So I'll just mark that. Don't need that anymore. Okay, so next what I'm going to do is on both the top and the bottom, I'm going to draw 2 lines, so one on either side, going parallel to this pocket opening. On the edge of the lining, these are only going to be 15 centimeters, and they're going to be at a, what's the word? They're going to be at a sort of separation of 1.5 centimeters from that central opening line. So again, this is the main pocket line here. This is the 13 centimeter opening, and these are the 2 sort of 15 centimeter lines running parallel at a 1.5 centimeter distance. What we're now going to do is snip along there all the way to the end, and then here, these 2 15 centimeter lines, we're going to snip along there as well. So we're going to basically snip a kind of cross shape. That kind of opens out there into a cross shape situation. Okay, so I've just flipped it to the wrong side of the fabric now, and what we're going to do is go to the ironing board or pressing board or whatever you like to call it, and we're going to fold these over to the inside, so along those lines there. So again, that's that 1.5 centimeter seam allowance, that's that parallel line I drew to the pocket opening. Press those open, and then these bits, these sort of shorter ends of the cross, we're going to fold open at the diagonal, so it's going to be like that. This is kind of what I meant. God, this is so fiddly. So, but you can see there, so we've kind of created this arrow-shaped opening here by folding those out like that and pressing them in place. Really do try and make sure that they're rolled up right to the edges of the cuts. That's kind of what it's going to look like on the right side. Okay, so I've also just marked on the 1.5 centimeters either side on the top side of the pocket opening, just so I can better see what I'm doing and make sure that this opening doesn't end up, you know, splayed too far open like that or closed too far like that. And I'm just going to very painstakingly pin it in place. So I'll see you in a couple of hours. Pin that so that I can stitch around the edge. So top stitch on the folded over lining. Now, obviously, depending on your lining and garment fabric matching, you will want to consider what thread color you want to be top stitching with. I didn't really consider that. I didn't really think about it until literally about 10 seconds ago before pressing record. I am just going to top stitch with my black garment thread. I think that'll look fine. I'm okay with it. And yeah, so we're going to top stitch first right at the edge, sort of like edge stitch. So just 1 millimeter in or so, all around that edge. And then we're going to do a parallel stitch again, sort of, you know, again, kind of up to you, but let's say 0.5 centimeter away, maybe just a couple of millimeters. And yeah, you'll end up with these 2 parallel rows of top stitching, just following this arrow shape around the edge of the pocket. So this pocket kind of lives and dies on the neatness of your top stitching. I'm pretty dissatisfied with mine, but you know, you live and learn. So that's the first round. Yeah, and if like me, you've done a pretty poor job on your first row of top stitching, I think the best thing to do is just go out of your way to make sure the second row is as parallel as possible with the first row regardless. Ultimately, it's the top stitching that's going to kind of stand out. Okay, so that's what we're looking at. Okay, so now I'm just going to trim away this excess here that's around the point of the arrow. So just like so, just along that diagonal. Let's be very careful, shan't we? So that's how it looks on the wrong side. So now we're going to turn to the pocket bag. So here's my 2 pieces of pocketing. Okay, so we're going to take the piece that's going to be nearest the inside of the lining. And as you can see, this is sort of lined up. These 2 edges are parallel with each other. This top edge of the pocketing and the pocket opening itself are parallel with each other. So that's going to be like that. But what we're going to do now is flip it over like this and lay this edge so that it is flush with the bottom edge seam allowance of this pocket opening. Okay, so like that. So again, that's going to fall down like that later on. Going to lay it in place like that, and we're going to baste it in place. And what I also ideally want to make sure is that, so this 1 centimeter edge here of the lining that's going to connect with the facing, that's the seam allowance I'm going to use later. So I want to make sure that my pocket bag isn't right up against it when it's folded down, but rather that it's leaving that seam allowance available so that we can avoid the pocket bag getting stuck in the facing and lining seam. Basting the edge of the pocket to that seam allowance there. I'll do. I'm just going to pin this pocket bag up here in position while we do the next step, which is just on the inside of the pocket opening, we're going to do a layer of top stitching that is going to catch that pocketing bag in the seam allowance. So here it's really just, again, kind of edge stitching just below the pocket opening. And yeah, only for this 13 centimeter pocket opening, so you don't need to go all the way. Okay, so I'm going to turn the pocketing bag down now, and then I'm just going to go and press that so it's nice and flat. Okay, so I've just pressed that, and what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to do another layer of top stitching just below, sort of 0.5 centimeter below that one I've just done, just making sure that your pocket bag isn't flapping anywhere it shouldn't be. You can also baste it into place or pin it into place but I'm lazy and in a hurry, so forget it. Okay, so I've got my other pocket bag here, and as before, I'm just going to lay it down, this time so it's flush with the other seam allowance of the pocket opening. So the top one, just make sure also that it's lined up with the other pocket bag, sort of from side to side. I'm just going to baste that in place and then do a top stitch on the other side. Okay, so basted, you can do 1 or 2 layers of decorative top stitching on that upper edge of the pocket. I think I'll just go with the one. Surprise, surprise. Just a quick word, you can also make this pocket with a button tab and a button. I'm leaving that out. I often don't necessarily like that kind of extra bulk of the button on the inside, but if you were to be adding a button tab, you would obviously, be making your tab and putting it in the middle of the pocket, and then you would be currently catching it in the seam I'm about to sew. Okay, so my 2 pocket bags are now officially attached. So all I need to do now is sew around the edges of the pocket bags to get them sewn together. Then we will trim the seam allowance to just be sort of 1 centimetre or so. Also best, if you haven't already, to remove this basting that you used to attach the pocket bags, because that's not needed anymore and it might get in the way. Try and round the corner a little bit. Not the neatest pocket bag I've ever sewn, but who cares? Okay, so now it's time to open the pocket and make it actually functional. So to use this pocket open, either using your seam ripper or your snippy scissors, and because we tacked nice and firmly on either end of the pocket opening, it should be nice and secure. Yeah, all right then. Well, what do you know? Functioning Barcelona pocket. Okay, so the construction of the lining panel itself is basically complete. So all we need to do now is attach it to the actual jacket panel and baste it to be secure. So this step can be a bit fiddly because you have these 2 things going away from each other but need to be curved round to be stitched like that. So just kind of good to make sure you've got it all lined up correctly. So remembering that I have the same hem allowance here as I did on the jacket, so 5 centimetres, so that should start there. And we're going to attach these with a 1 centimetre seam allowance, and we're just going to end, or start, just beyond where the hem come up to. Yeah, so I've just pinned that. It looks correct to me, I'm happy with that. So I'm just going to sew, again, these 2 edges together at a 1 centimetre seam allowance. And obviously when you get to that rounded edge, you're going to be catching the seam allowance 2 of that pocket. And yeah, obviously just take time going around. As you can see, I'm a very slow sewer and I make enough mistakes as it is. Making sure also that that little pleat stays nice and folded and doesn't sort of come open while we're sewing around that edge. So again, now this stitch is going to secure that pleat. Okay, so we've officially attached it. Pins flying everywhere, not my problem. Pretty pleased with that. As you can see, the pocket has clearance from that seam. This pleat has been caught. I think everything's come out pretty well. Yep, so now we're just going to get on and start basting the lining into place so that, again, we can continue with the construction of the jacket and everything is going to be as it should be and not moving around in unexpected, unwanted ways. You're going to trim this little bit of the pocket that's sticking out beyond the seam. So the first thing I need to baste is just along this seam here on the facing side. I'm just going to baste the facing into the canvas or into the jacket, and I want to make sure that the seam allowance of this stitch here is facing sort of inwards towards the jacket, so into the lining section and not the facing section. So I'm basically just going fully to the other side of the jacket. Yep. And so here, just making sure that that seam allowance is facing the way I want it to face, inwards and not sticking into the facing. And obviously, yeah, just kind of smoothing it out to make sure it's lying as it should. Okay, so now that the facing and this seam connecting the facing and the lining are sort of fixed in place relative to the jacket, we're gonna bring this back over and cross stitch the canvas and this seam allowance together. Nothing like a good old cross stitch. And I'm just gonna use my basting thread here because while it is a proper seam that's not gonna be removed at any point, it is gonna be on the inside of the jacket, so, you know, it's not gonna be visible. Once we remove the basting stitch that we just did, this is going to be the stitch essentially orienting the facing lining seam placement with relation to the actual jacket front itself. So it needs to, you know, be a stable, if not overly sturdy stitch. So really only into the actual canvas itself, so not through to the front of the jacket, and then on the other stitch, it's just into that seam allowance joining the facing and the lining. As ever, these do not need to be stitches that are like yanked super tight, they just need to be stable and steady. And obviously when we get to the plastron, we'll be stitching into that because that covers the canvas. But really at no point stitching through to the visible garment side of the fabric, because then we'd have to snip the stitch and the whole thing would come loose. And then we're just going to stop here about 10 centimeters away from the shoulder edge. Right then, so that's how that looks. We're going to baste down through the center of this front panel, just from, yeah, top of the shoulder there to
just the start of the hip pocket. Try and smooth it out to make sure it's lying in position, but also bear in mind that, you know, this is a stitch that will be coming out later on. The lining, we've already basically determined where it's gonna lie with that canvas stitch we just did, the cross stitch, and then also with when we connect it to the back lining in next week. Do make sure though that this pocket bag is lying flat, because we'll be getting to that in a second. So we've just entered into the hip pocket now, and I think that's a good place to stop. We've made sure that the inside pocket is in place there, because what we're now going to do, as we did with the hip pockets, is cross stitch this, or at least the edge that overlaps the canvas, into the canvas. So this section here of that pocket edge. Yeah, and as ever, if you're finding this useful or entertaining or both, please do like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Going to be plenty more content like this, and there's already a decent amount. So yeah, make sure you don't miss anything. Job done. And again, these are just the few structural stitches that are making sure that in key places, the lining, the canvas, the facing are all actually properly attached together, rather than just, you know, floating willy-nilly, and everything between the lining and the canvas and the jacket is just basically empty space. It's not going to be like that, but it's also got enough flexibility to move around in a sort of useful manner and a comfortable manner. Okay, so that's that done. And now one last thing, coup de grace. Turn the jacket over, and we're going to baste from, again, about sort of 7.5 centimeters down here, staying that sort of distance away from the seam line. We're going to baste from here, round the side, down, and across to sort of central point here, leaving a good sort of 12 to 15 centimeters free at the bottom. Okay, yeah, so I've started there, I've come around here, and I'm coming down here, and I'm going to cut in there. So if you remember when we were attaching the canvas in the front panel, we already did a sort of line of basting in that shape, so we followed that a little bit and then gone off in our own way. And again, making sure the lining is laid out flat underneath the jacket, and yeah, and that you're going through all the layers, catching the lining, catching the canvas, catching the garment fabric, all that jazz. So through the pocket here, catching the lining, through whatever might stand in your way. Okay, that's it for the front lining. We have covered how to cut out your lining pieces based purely on your actual jacket pattern pieces. We have learned how to make a Barcelona pocket, a rather handsome addition, if I may say so myself. Not mine, but you know, in theory. And yeah, we've learned how to attach the facing and the line together, and how to baste the jacket ready to go forward. If you're only just checking in on the whole sewing my wedding suit journey, and you want to start at the beginning, you can do so by clicking here where my face is, or if it's already next week by the time you're watching this, you will find in place of my face the next episode, where I will be cutting out and attaching the back lining and then putting all the panels together. Otherwise, if watching this has started an itch to maybe start your own tailoring project, but you're not really sure how or where to start, you can click here. I will help you get started, and we can open Pandora's box together. As I said, please do like and subscribe if this has been of any value to you whatsoever. And yeah, see you next week. Till then, have a good one.